root issues that affects our life. Kind of what I just said right now. And sets the stage for us to walk into as well as stay in narcissistic relationships. Really, really quick, ladies, I do want to make sure we get through all of this tonight, especially because I know some of the ladies have to leave at an early time and can't stay late. So let's take questions and comments at the end. If you need me to repeat something, please feel free to let me know, but any type of sharing or, yes, I know, I'm going through that as well, or specific questions, let's do at the very end so we can get through all the material, okay? So Tracy says, for me personally, the idea of being rejected or abandoned debilitated and negatively motivated me for years. It was the primary reason I tolerated the intolerable or even the uncomfortable. It was why I put myself in second position, and it was one of the primary reasons I allowed the people I loved to treat me in horrible ways. Due to the fear of abandonment, rejection would level me. The fear of someone not loving me would panic me, and the thought of being alone would paralyze me. The hole in my soul that it created kept me on a pattern and path of pain for years and years, over and over again. So if you are tired of living with a hole in your soul, if you are tired of choosing less than to fill it, if you are tired of rejection having the power to level you, and we all know what that feels like, and the silence of being alone to paralyze you, then this class, From Abandonment to Self-Love, was written just for you. There is much love and healing here for those who suffer from the pain and fear of rejection and abandonment. Signed, Dr. Tracy. So our focus for today's class is to learn specifically about abandonment trauma. Let's begin our teaching by going through she first wants to give some background information and then get real into the abandonment trauma. So she says, let me first establish the self-love connection with this class. If you recall from our introductory class, Dr. Tracy says that self-love is the antidote to narcissistic abuse. Self-love is the antidote to narcissistic abuse. And she describes self-love as a non-negotiable foundation, a foundation beneath our emotional feet. Now, the thing about this foundation is that it is made up of individual planks that collectively build a steely foundation of self-love, which makes love and life sustainable, and without it, we all would certainly die. Well, one of those planks in the self-love foundation and our ability to heal from narcissistic abuse is the right to validation. Write that down, right to validation. Let's talk about validation. The definition of validation means the action of making or declaring something officially acceptable. The action of making or declaring something officially acceptable. So think of validation, acceptable. Validation, acceptable, okay? Which this is so important to know because the opposite of acceptable or acceptance is rejectable or rejection, or wrong or defective, which are the things that narcissism makes us believe about ourselves. We live with an inner knowing that we are acceptable, meaning we do not live with a blur or confusion of self, of people, or situations. So memo from Normal Land, when it comes to self-love, validation is a non-negotiable. Validation is a non-negotiable. So let's gain some clarity today by jumping into our healing for the week. We have 4 intentions for class tonight. Number 1, to learn to recognize if we are operating in abandonment trauma. To recognize if we are operating in abandonment trauma. Number 2, to discover where our abandonment originated. To discover where our abandonment originated. Number 3, to discover how abandonment trauma attracts or keeps narcissists in our life. Hi, Laura. Number 3, to discover how abandonment trauma attracts or keeps narcissists in our life. And number 4, best of all, we will learn how to heal. Okay, so our reclaiming tool of the week, an emotional root wrench. An emotional root wrench. Have you guys seen what wrenches look like? Think of that. It's like a root wrench. You want to go to the root and pull it out with the wrench, okay? We're going to talk about what this is, an emotional root wrench. The next tool we are going to put into our life toolbox, our life toolbox is an emotional root wrench. Do you know what a root wrench is? A root wrench is a tool that is used to pull out roots so the weeds and any other unwanted growths will stop duplicating themselves. Question: why do we need a root wrench in our emotional toolbox? Answer: because to heal, we must go to the root of the problem and extricate it so the problem stops repeating itself in our life. We must go to the root so the problem stops repeating it. Does that make sense, ladies? Okay. So question, how many of you have ever pulled a weed out by the leaves only? I think we all have. And what happened in a few weeks? It grew back, right? Why? Because it was still alive and well under the surface and still had the power to grow. Do you get what I'm saying? We didn't pull it out with the roots. So because the roots are still there, the plant is still able to grow. So reclaiming me principle. The only way to heal is to discover the root of your pain. The only way to heal is to discover the root of your pain, not the symptom, and pull it out. Everyone got that? Do you need me to repeat that? Reclaiming me principle. The only way to heal is to discover the root of your pain, not the symptom, and pull it out. So memo from Normal Land. To heal, you must discover the root of your pain, not the symptom, and pull it out. To heal, you must discover the root of your pain, not the symptom, and pull it out. If you do not pull out the root, you will repeat the same pain over and over again. So how many of us repeat offenders can agree with that? Yes. As we begin this class, I want to give you three definition words. First, the word triggered. Everybody say triggered.
Triggered.
So what does triggered mean? The WIN definition of triggered is when someone or something has the power to send you into an emotional spin. And we all know what that feels like, right? I think we all have experienced that and experienced it to a very high level, actually, especially all of us being empaths. Yes?
You sent us to emotional sin?
Spin.
Spin.
S-P-I-N. Yeah, spin. Thank you for clarifying that. Meanwhile, when it or they or what they do has the power to derail you, to trip you up, to make you lose your center, to make you step out of your present, why is this important? Because self-love, memo from Normal Land, our present is our only place of power. Our present is our only place of power, and especially being present to life and our surroundings, but most importantly, present to ourself, like connection with self, because we when we get triggered, we disassociate from self. We all know that feeling, right? It's like out of body experience, out of mind experience. Our emotions are all over the board and we don't know where we are. The reason that happens is because we lose connection with self. So that's why being present to self and connection to self is so important. And we're going to get into this, but understanding how to get back to that as quickly as possible after being triggered, after losing that connection, is so important for us. Okay? So we're going to get into that.
Can you repeat? When your emotions are all over the board, what did you say after that? It allows you...
It makes you disassociate with self. You lose connection with self, so you're not present with self when you're triggered. But the most our place of power is when we are connected to self, when we are present to self. That's self-love. Okay.
And you're gonna tell us how to be that.
Yeah. We're gonna talk about this. So let me clarify something about this word. Being triggered is different than being angry. Authentic anger, which we actually have an entire class on, is a clear emotion that comes with a clear path of violation. A clear emotion with a clear path of violation. Being triggered, on the other hand, is a very unclear emotion. That's why we start spinning, because we fall into this confusion, like this gray cloud, and we don't know what's happening or what just happened or what went wrong. We just feel very confused. It's very unclear. Okay, so that's I want to make sure that you guys get that. Authentic anger is very clear. We know we're angry. We know exactly what happened. We know who did it. We know why we're upset. When we are triggered, it's a very unclear emotion. Sometimes we don't know what happened. We don't know who did it. We don't know how to go about it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. As when we get triggered, we are in a place where we know that something is wrong. So we're in this confusion state. We don't know what's going on, but we do know something's wrong. But we don't yet have a clear understanding or a clear path of action as to how we will rescue ourselves from this potential harm. This is important because when we are triggered by abandonment or rejection, which happens a lot in narcissistic relationships, we are in a non-clear emotional state, meaning we have stepped out of self-love. And when we are in a non-clear state, we will oftentimes make knee-jerk reactions, or AKA choices, that will keep us powerless. Choices like drinking, overeating, depressing, sexing, choices like panicking and reacting without a plan, choices like accepting the unacceptable, choices like going back, choices like continuing to engage with the narcissist. Those were just some examples. The reason we begin this teaching introducing the word trigger is because when we suffer from self-love deficiency disorder, or CTPSD, or narcissistic abuse syndrome, the fear of abandonment or rejection is a huge trigger for us, a trigger that can send us into repeat cycles of pain.
Wait, so what is that diagnosis called?
Well, trigger, so when we become triggered, it's because we suffer from self-love deficiency disorder, CTPSD, which she's talked about before, or narcissistic abuse syndrome. So it doesn't have to be all three, but it will definitely be usually one of these three that we're going through why we're feeling triggered. The fear and abandonment of rejection is a huge trigger for us that sends us into the repeat cycles of pain, meaning why we get stuck in the narcissistic abuse syndrome or the self-love deficiency disorder. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next two words that we want to talk about, she's laying, if you guys are getting a sense, we're laying the foundation for these different words, and then she's going to bring it all together, okay? So let's just understand each component, and then she's going to tie it all in together. The next two words we want to talk about are loneliness and abandonment. I want to first give you the dictionary.com definitions of abandonment and loneliness, and then follow it by giving you the Win Recovery Urban Dictionary definition of both. According to dictionary.com, abandonment means to withdraw one's support or help. To withdraw one's support or help. And loneliness means dejected because of the want of company of others, or, well, not or, but also sad at the thought that one is alone.
Abandonment, to withdraw one's
Support or help. And loneliness, dejected because of the want of company of others, and sad at the thought that one is alone. So at WIN, Dr. Tracy describes the two a little differently. She describes them as the feeling of having a hole in your soul. The feeling of having a hole in your soul. It's an emptiness and internal pain that runs so deep and so endless that it's difficult to say where it begins or where it ends. And it's almost like that horrible gut feeling in our solar plexus that just feels like this dark abyss, and we don't know where it came from or what's going on, but we just know it's right there, and it's horrible and it's hurtful, and we just want it to go away. That's what she means by the feeling of having a hole in your soul. So have you ever seen the cartoons where a cannonball gets blasted through the center of a character and you can see right through them, kind of like in Looney Tunes? Did you ever see Looney Tunes and then the cannonball just goes right through them? Well, that is what those of us with abandonment and loneliness issues feel like. That hole. There's a deep aching hole inside of our soul that leaves us feeling isolated and alone. Though this hole in our soul has ghost-like elements, there is one thing for sure. That hole in our soul is most definitely there, always there, ready to remind us of its presence anytime anyone directly or indirectly rejects us. So what has the power to ignite that internal rejection? The answer is anything and anyone that is laced with hints of abandonment. Anything or anyone that is laced with hints of abandonment. That means anything from a divorce to death, to a person's tone, to a boss telling us how to write a letter more effectively, to people switching plans on us, to people not keeping their word about big things and little things, people not being on time for our engagements together, people saying that they will call you at a certain time and not keeping or adhering to that time. So it spans a whole range of different things. These are just some examples that we all can relate to. And of course, the entire devaluation and discard phase of the narcissistic cycle, of course, is laced with hints of abandonment and will ignite that internal rejection in us. It is though we catch these moments of rejection in the stomach and get thrown to the floor, left terrified, debilitated, triggered, and helpless in this place called life. It is something Dr. Tracy calls abandonment pain, or AKA the hole in your soul syndrome. Those of us with the hole in our soul try many things to fill that deep, gaping ache, but unfortunately nothing seems to fix it. Alcohol doesn't fix it. Food definitely doesn't fix it. Titles don't fix it. Accomplishments don't fix it. Education doesn't fix it. And for some of us, even religion just doesn't seem to be able to fill that entire hole forever. So This causes more pain because we are told that God can fix anything, and yet when we are still living with that hole in our soul, this makes us feel even more ashamed, more helpless, and more hopeless, because when it comes to us, God just doesn't get it. Unfortunately, when it comes to filling this hole in our soul, we are almost like legal addicts, trying to fill this gaping ache with anything. Again, we try to stuff it with food, or numb it with drugs, or alcohol, or silence it with busy calendars, or seek many sex partners. Or we just want to fill it with social things, friends and other girls. But whatever we're doing, even though that's a very healthy thing to do, the fact that we're trying to fill this hole just isn't giving our soul that satisfaction that we need. But guess what? The number one thing we abandonment sufferers use to fill our hole in our soul is relationships. Which unfortunately, due to the existing trauma wounds, we end up attracting a narcissist who only adds fuel to the fire and fresh wounds to our internal hole. I'm going to repeat that because I think that's very, very important to hear. We, as empaths and abandonment sufferers, all of us here, I think, can attest to, we're not alcoholics, we're not drug addicts, we're not sex addicts, we're not really that busy with our calendars. I mean, we're living our normal life, but when we do have that ache in our soul, we're trying to find love, and we're trying to find love within relationships. So even though we may have gone through one relationship that didn't work, we very often, very quickly jump into another one right away. That's what she's talking about here. And because of our existing trauma wounds, we end up attracting a narcissist who only adds fuel to the fire and adds fresh wounds to our internal hole. So the question then becomes, how did we get here? It began in our childhood. Now, before we enter into the part of the teaching, Tracy wants you to know a couple of things. Number one, if you are wondering why we need to revisit our childhood, or if you are thinking, isn't the pain we are experiencing happening today? The answer is yes, the pains in your today relationship are real. But the reason we are experiencing them or choosing them again is because what you will find in your healing is that the abandonment battles and rejection battles that you are facing today are actually leftover and unhealed wounds from childhood. So us tolerating narcissistic love today in adult years is our way of trying to fix the unfinished business from our initial childhood wounds of abandonment from our past. Does that make sense? When we're children, we must have experienced some type of abandonment wound, and we never really truly dealt with it or healed it or fixed it or allowed our soul to feel self-love. That's why all these years later into our adult years, we're experiencing something very, very similar in our narcissistic love relationships. Okay? So, as we, in our way to trying to fix the unfinished business of abandonment from yesterday, we want to revisit our childhood. It is important to know that we are not going on a witch hunt, meaning we are not going to negatively blame our parents for their non-stellar parenting choices, nor are we going to relive the trauma of childhood. Instead, we are going to acknowledge the trauma that happened, bear witness to what happened, and that is called validation. So that's number one. We're going to acknowledge our wound, bear witness to it, which is called validation, meaning acceptance. We're going to become aware and we're going to accept. Okay? Number two, our goal is to examine what went wrong.